Ex-Inmates of Reddit. What was the stupidest thing you've seen a new inmate do on his first day in prison? Story 1. Told a kid there was a pool out at yard. Guard saw him waiting to go out in shorts with his shower towel and asked him what he was doing. Kid said, "I'm gonna go swimming outside, it looks nice." Don't think I've laughed so hard in my life, it's unoriginal but always funny. Story 2. Worked as a corrections officer, guy got busted for sexual assault of a minor, figured everyone else in the tank was on similar charges, so began talking openly about it, feeling he was safe. Story 3. Kid came in and, I assume he has watched a lot of movies because he figured he'd fight the biggest guy on the range. Lol. He wasn't even the toughest guy in the hospital he woke up in. Story 4. Obligatory. Not me, but I know a guy, and his cellmate was a young 19-year-old kid. The kid was confused and in the course of talking about their lives, admitted he was bi. The guy I know told him, "Hey man, that's cool, but don't tell that to anyone else in here, seriously." Story 5. This idiot walked right into a Mexican gang meeting and almost got beaten up. Source: Am the idiot. Edit: I was in jail, not prison. My mistake. Again, am idiot. Second edit: Since many people are asking. From what I understand, the difference between prison and jail is this. Jail is for sentences of less than a year, whereas prison is for sentences of over a year, varying from state to state. Jails is run by the city or county. Prisons ran by state or federal government. You can go to jail to await your trial before sentencing, then after be sent back to jail or to prison depending on how long and whether it's a felony or not. Prison is for felonies. Story 6. Kid gets booked in, hits the unit, and starts borrowing food and other commissary items. Before he knew it, he was $200 in the hole. Problem is, in jail and prison, most people who are willing to loan items out expect 2 or 3 of the same item back. You know, interest. Very easy way to get yourself indebted is by borrowing any food or other items. Never get in debt while incarcerated. Story 7. Skinny kid. Hippie type got busted with some weed. Someone else on the range was getting beat up for something or other, and the kid tried to intervene. Just said, "Hey, leave him alone." Got beat to within an inch of his life in the shower. Pro tip: in jail, mind your own business. Story 8. A slight twist. We had a pink wet floor sign that we would put up in the entrance to the showers, so everyone knew there was someone in there jerking off. The fun game was to watch the new guys, myself included, innocently walk into the entrance to the showers that very first time, past the pink wet floor sign, and then see him come skittering back out a few moments later. Story 9. Goofy-looking kid, curly hair, thick glasses. He comes in and for some reason he befriends me. He starts telling me what he did, sexual assault if a minor. I told him not to be telling nobody that because it'll get you in trouble. The rest of that day and the next, I bailed out by then, I could hear him from across the hall telling other people. Not surprised if he's been kicked around a few times. Story 10. When the skinny little street thug white kid walked across the yard and threw a "my numya" at a bench full of full-blown Crips. Didn't see him much after that storm. Story 11. Father-in-law did 12 years on a second-degree murder rap back in the very early 90s. He told me that one time this new guy plopped himself down at the Hells Angels table and started eating breakfast. When he was told to move, he ignored them. After breakfast, the COs ended up having to cut through about 6 rolls of duct tape to get the guy loose. He never sat near the HAs again. Story 12. One guy bragging about what he did to get himself in jail. Other dude showering barefoot. Great way to get convicted. Great way to get jungle fungus. Story 13. Admit that he was in for sexual assault and being a pedo. And then it was about 8 p.m. and we found out he was a chronic masturbator and he would not stop jacking off in his bunk. He was 22. And it was jail, not prison. So at that moment, we had maybe 12-15 people in our cell. Some guy woke up from a nap and thought he was having a seizure, so he went to go check on him. What a god shock they both had. Edit: spelling and grammar. Story 14. Not me, but my dad. Guy came in bragging at what he did. Said he was a monster and the toughest guy around and that he could take anybody on in the pen. Giving him the benefit of the doubt, he apparently was a big and tough guy. Come to find out, though, he was in for the assault, rape, then murder of a woman and her child. He might have been big and tough, but not after 5 big guys beat the absolute out of him and practically killed him. As most of you know, the one thing all prisoners can agree on is that anyone who messes with kids or women are on an immediate hit list. Edit. The women thing might have just been a rule amongst him and the PPL he ran with. Story 15. Where I was in prison, they utilized 40mm soft round launchers to respond to group disturbances. Let me tell you, they weren't soft. Kid comes in thinking he's still hardcore from juvenile hall because guards there didn't do anything when people fought. Decided to up and join a gang that he knew nothing about on his first day. Thought he was tough and started to diss the gang they had high tensions with at the time and started a group disturbance. COs respond, tell him to get down, he refuses and curses at them, boom, 40mm to his face. Was an accidental shot to the face according to the CO. Face was distorted as after. Fractured skull. On his first day. Story 16. So my dad's currently convicted, and the craziest story he's told me is one of the newer inmates was young and arrogant, always spouting off bullshit about how unaccountable he was. Then one day, another inmate packed up his items, went into the younger inmate's cell and tried to strangle him. The younger inmate was that fucking annoying. He survived. The attempted murderer is in max, and when the younger inmate came back from the hospital, he was still spouting bullshit. Story 17. There was an old myth that if you challenged the meanest guy in your block to a fight, everyone else would leave you alone. It's true, no one will torment you if you are dead. Kid tried it and got dropped off the 5th tier. First day in Gen Pop, last day in Gen Pop. Most guys just want to do their time alone. Most rape and violence in prison is about debt or tax. If you play it straight, 98% of guys will just leave you alone. Fucking someone up on the yard makes your time worse, not better. Loss of privilege, of time in solitary. Most people don't want that. Most of the straight-up psychopaths are in 23-1 lockdown anyway. You get in debt or shoot your mouth off and you will get settled or taxed. Both are to be avoided. Story 18. Got busted for smoking weed with 2 buddies. When we put in the holding cell, one of them wanted to mark the event by carving his name in the paint on the cell door. When we got put in a cell later, they came back and took him to solitary for a week. Story 19. Saw this weird, unshaven, scraggly young guy with a yellow beanie once who said he agreed with the Latin kings on social issues, but fiscally he was more of an Aryan. He ended up joining both gangs. Story 20. This weird guy named Robert from the TV show 60 Days In has a couple stories that could be in this thread. The stupidest may have been when he covered the prison camera with a sheet. Went to solitary 30 days. He quit the program halfway. Story 21. There was a new guy who came in one day. You could tell he was gay by his mannerisms. A few days into his sentence, he was forced to a guy's. He bit it off. Story 22. This may not have been his first day, but I will never forget this. This while I was in the intake tank, which is the first tank or section you go into after being processed in county. This young kid comes into county and keeps complaining that he doesn't get his cannabinol and other marijuana-related prescriptions in jail. He was really arrogant and constant everyone off. During count one day, as we were all in our bunks, he starts complaining again, and then says to the guard, "What if we all riot?" Immediately, like 10 other guys yell very loudly, "We don't know or agree with him." The guard then says, "What the did you say?" The kid then continues about rioting and that he has rights. Everyone in the tank fucking stays like frozen in their bunk, trying their best to be non-threatening and also show they have no interest in what this moron is saying. So the guard picks him up by his throat and slams him into the wall. After scaring the kid shitless, he explains he has a new charge for inciting a riot. Kid gets hauled off to solitary. Never saw him again, but I heard he spent the rest of his 30, 60, 90, whatever amount, days in solitary. Absolutely insane to me that he'd say that in a fucking county jail. Story 23. Just going to generalize. Small town folk who are used to being the biggest and baddest. Big fish, small pond types who think they are going to be king when they walk in. They usually are dominated pretty quickly. Dominated being either beat or made into a best bet if you go to prison, hopefully no one ever goes, is unless you know someone well connected on the inside, just keep your head down, focus on yourself, and do your time. It's going to be boring, menial, and seemingly endless, but you don't want to get caught up in any gang stuff or be snitching. There's a code and system in prison that needs to be followed, and if you walk in like King of Turd Hill when you are a nobody, you will learn real quick that you ain't nothing. Story 24. I found a hypodermic needle in my thin mattress and tried to go give it to the guard. I was bum rushed by an inmate, whose it probably was, and told that if I had given it to the guard, I would have faced a P-test and solitary. This was day 1. On day 3, I asked to trade laundry detergent for a back rub, and only after I did so did I realize that everyone thought I was gay. I was a very dumb 18-year-old white girl. Story. 25 guy came in. Got on the top bunk within 10 minutes. Dude rolled off it and smacked his head on the concrete. Started to have a seizure, guards eventually came and just videotaped him for a while, in the middle of the room. Eventually, they walked him out when he stopped, but then he ran into the wall and fell down, then started to seizure again. They just kept filming. Nobody really thought he was having seizures, but he hit his head pretty bad, so they took him to the infirmary. Story 26. Went in when I was a young idiot. Our pod was all bunk beds, no cells. Just the room with beds and a side room with a TV. It was a unit for all the people working the same job. New guy comes in, little white dude, quiet and kept to himself. Until one night, out of nowhere, he starts sprinting around the room singing at the top of his lungs in the tune of Black Sabbath's Iron Man, but changed the lyrics to I am the N-word man, running through the hood from the Ku Klux Klan. Everyone was just kind of frozen for about 15 seconds, seriously confused. Then someone tripped him, and then it was just mayhem until the CO could get enough help to disperse the crowd. I remember being surprised he survived. Everyone in the unit had steel toe boots for the job we did, holding them and hitting him in with them instead of wearing and kicking. The scene afterwards where all the guys are trying to figure out whose boots are whose and comparing who's had the most blood was freaking surreal. Story 27. I did 14 years in federal prison for wire fraud. I got out last February. I'm 36. Some things I can say are these. While your sexuality may not be an issue outside of prison, inside prison, male inmates who are openly gay are generally disrespected. All gambling and drugs create debts that are at some point unable to be paid and can result in serious issues for yourself. Most prisons operate a social hierarchy based on gang affiliations or hometowns, although there can be large separations based on race. However, rapists and child molesters will basically be free game for anyone who wants to take their or torment them. You might have been outside of prison, but generally you can't fight several people at once, which is what would happen if you talk about how much of a you are. Keep your to yourself and don't talk crazy to people, which is seen as disrespect. Disrespect has a different meaning in prison, and you'll figure it out. It's best to just keep to yourself unless as much as possible, unless you want to embrace prison life and become institutionalized. Prison is not a place to make friends. Story 28. I wheeled my cart to the stairs with my footlockers, mattress, and pillows on it. I carried up my footlockers and shut my cell door. I forgot my mattress downstairs. Somehow, no one had stolen it by the time I had the cops open my cell door and I went down to get it. Story 29. I got bunk restriction while I was in jail on one of my first night. Twice a day they did roll call where we all had to sit on our bunk be quiet while the officer came bunk to bunk and checked all of our wristbands and made sure we were all who we are. Halfway through he was doing this, someone rips the loudest, fattest, longest wet I've ever heard in my life. Me having the mind of a 5-year-old burst into laughter. I've never heard a like this in my life. A few other guys laugh, but even thinking of it now, I giggle about it. Anyways, the officer's like, all right, settle down, but I can't stop laughing about it. He tells me to calm down, but I tell him through my tears of laughter, I literally cannot help it. I really couldn't. It was the funniest thing that happened the few days I was in there. Anyway, he gets pissed. I try to explain I'm not trying to be rude and disobey him through my laughter, but he isn't having it. Luckily, he just gave me bunk restriction and didn't punish everyone, but I could see the TV from my bunk, so I just hung out the rest of the night. TLDR. I couldn't stop laughing at the biggest I ever heard in my life and got grounded to my bunk for a night. Edit. Obligatory. Wow, my top comment is about farts. Meh, could be worse. Story 30. Spent a year in a Bangkok prison. Saw lots of go down, but the one story I have that's relevant to your question has to be this English guy that turned up one day. It was actually the first and only other British guy I would encounter while I was there. And the moment he came through the gates, I was called over to try and communicate and translate for him. He was refusing to talk to anyone, basically going on a silent strike because he thought he wasn't supposed to be there and they were denying his human rights and all that. First thing that happens when you enter the prison is they shave your head. This kid had massive dreadlocks and didn't want anyone touching them, but at this point, he had already made his bed, and he was going to have to sleep in it. I went over to him and introduced myself, asked him what his name was, where he was from, etc. But he just stared at me in silence the whole time. One of the guards gave me a photocopy of his passport so I could see his name, age, and where he was from, etc. Against all odds, this kid was actually from my hometown, so my face lit up. Finally, I would have someone to talk to, and I'm sure we could chat and bond while we were in there. God, did I need that. But he just refused to engage with anyone, even me who was trying so hard to get a word out of him. I explained over and over that he'd lost the game. He's in prison now, and there is no way out of it, so just do what the guards say. They're going to shave your head first of all, and there's nothing you can do about it. Because no one had explained to me what exactly was going on, I was just confused why he wasn't talking to me. The more I spoke to him and the more he refused to talk back, the more pissed off I got. I just couldn't understand why he was being so difficult, and by the end of our encounter I was fucking shouting at him, telling him to stop being such a little and just accept your fate. I didn't know if he was retarded or genuinely couldn't speak, but it became clear that he was just putting on an act. Eventually, I just told the guards there is all I can do if he's not willing to speak, so go ahead and do what you've got to do. I said my goodbyes to him and told him he really needs to accept his fate. It will be easier on everyone, and when you're ready to talk, I'll be here because, let me tell you, that's the best thing you could hope for in a place like this. He ended up being pinned down by the guards and his dreads shave off while he was screaming and screaming. Of course I felt bad, but come on. Time to swallow your pride, mate. He was then admitted to the prison, and he came to sit with me. He still refused to speak, so I got a notebook and pen, and we communicated via writing for a few days. The guards didn't know what to do with him, and all the prisoners just thought he was a mental case. I still wasn't sure myself. After a few days of gossip, another prisoner told me that the kid was faking it. When I asked how he knew, he told me that he was arrested at the same police station with him, and the whole time he was in custody, this kid had been screaming murder at the officers, claiming the violation of human rights and all that. Then one day when I was having a chat with him by means of writing, he started asking me about the embassy, and I told him about what services they offer and how they can help, etc. Then he wrote down on the paper, "Can I make a phone call through the embassy?" I just looked at him dead on and said, "What good is a phone call if you can't fucking talk?" I couldn't help but chuckle, and he knew the gig was up. At least with me it was. Not long after that, the kid was taken from the prison and carted off to a mental health institution so they could evaluate him. I didn't see him for a few weeks when he suddenly reappeared looking very disheveled and completely traumatized. And wouldn't you know it, he could suddenly speak. He started telling me about the horrors of the mental institution he had just experienced, and my God, it sounded fucking awful, even worse than the hellhole I was currently in, which is really saying something. We bonded for the month or so he was there, and we exchanged details. I have spoken to him since I've been out, and it turns out we have a fair amount of mutual friends, which is one of a coincidence. Anyway, the point of this story is he was a fucking idiot for simply not cooperating with the guards and the prison rules. It's all well and good putting up a fight in the courts and with the local police. But once you're past that and you find yourself in prison, just fucking do as you're told. They can make life so much worse for you. Story 31. My family attorney told me about one of his clients who was sentenced to 2 years for a federal case, non-violent. Someone gave him really bad advice about how to survive in federal prison. He followed the advice and found a big, tough-looking guy on the very first day. He beat him up severely. The victim turned out to be a tough-looking guy who was actually a gentle giant who didn't fight back much. Ended up with 2 broken legs and a fractured rib. My attorney's client got 4 extra years added to his 2-year sentence. That's what I call stupid. This was about 15 years ago. Not sure if the guy survived prison or not. Story 32. Not an ex-inmate, but my mom's friend is a retired prison guard for a max security prison. He'd been there for a long time and a lot of the inmates liked and respected him. There were a few instances where new inmates would try to be difficult or attack him to impress the older inmates. The newbies would get beat up pretty good and wouldn't cause trouble for him anymore. Don't mess with well-liked guards. Story 33. Here's one from a good friend of mine, we'll call him T, who spent half his life inside. Picked a fight with the local inmates over something minor to establish dominance. The guy was European, and Europeans were kept separate from locals with good reason. There would be full-scale gang wars between the two sides now and again within the prison. None of his fellow Europeans backed him up. Hell, some of them even jumped in on kicking the ever-loving out of the newbie. T doesn't think the guy made it. Story 34. Dude was talking non-stop about gay guys and how he would never have relations with another dude. Gay guy named Alexa, Cheetos is what they are called in Arizona prisons, knocked him out and he woke up to getting his sucked by another man. Story 35. New dude got sentenced and came over to the felony pod. 2 levels. We're playing spades, and this dude says, "Man, I can't wait to get out of here." My partner in spades asked how much time he has. New dude says something. "Man, I got 4 months." My spade partner just stood up, smacked the cards out of his hand, told him to STFU, and stop bitching about 4 months. He then said, "I got fucking life now what?" and proceeded to beat his. CO took his sweet time too. Story 36. Pretty much just hearing younger guys lie trying to impress. Odds are, if you a real G, then you can tell who's who. The ones who get caught lying are the ones who have the hardest time because trust level is low to begin with. Include lies and yay. I'd say this is mostly for JDCs, but county jails and prisons have the same problem, I'm sure. Story 37. Long but funny story. I worked for a PD. We arrested a local regular on an outstanding FTA warrant. The guy was always a PETA. The county jail was full, so we're contracted with an adjacent county jail nicknamed the Workhouse. It was old and nasty and had a much tougher urban clientele. It took about 45 minutes to drive there, and on the way, the prisoner was being chatty. He asked me to do him a favor when we got to the jail, which was, "Don't put me in with any of those GD nun me." We get to the jail and sit the prisoner on the bench. There is a large black woman working the intake desk, and she and I process the paperwork. 15 minutes later, I'm headed out the door when I stop and look at the prisoner on the bench. I turn to the woman and say, "Oh yeah, I forget. He has a request." The prisoner starts violently shaking his head. "No!" The woman chuckles and says, "Oh yeah? What's that?" I repeat his request that he doesn't want to be put in with any GD nutsays. Her eyes get real big, and she smiles at me saying, "Yes, sir, I'll take care of that." The prisoner looked like he was going to pass out. She immediately called for 2 guards who came from the back dragging logging chains. These were 2 black guys who looked like they were linebackers in the NFL. I smiled at the prisoner and walked to my cruiser. Story 38. A new guy was in his 50s and had developed addiction problems later in life. He somehow thought that his age afforded him control of the remote for the only TV on the range. The 10 inmates that rushed his cell, kicked the living out of him, and threw him down the stairs felt otherwise. Story 39 asked a friend of mine who I was in rehab with. He said, "Dumb young guy comes in and borrows money, not able to pay it back." The sound of him being raped was horrible. Story 40. So this actually about me. My first day inside, I sat down at a table in my block. Some guy came over and said it was his seat. Me, being young and dumb, thought, I'm not going to get punked on my first day, so I told him it's my seat now. He walked away and came back with 3 other guys, and they beat me pretty bad. Believe it or not, I was the one who got the mark for it too. Guard wrote it down as, "I initiated the fight. Spent some time in the hole for it too." Story 41. Some guys told a new guy that if he told the guard he was suicidal, the guard was obligated to give him a cigarette and let him smoke. What really happens is they take away all your psi, throw you in a turtle suite, and put you on suicide watch for 2 days in an empty cement room. I hated jail, but God, I had some laughs in there. Story 42. He dropped the soap. Everyone was laughing at him. For the rest of his stint, the rest of the inmates called him Klutz. It all worked out for him, though. He moved to Canada and started an extremely popular Tech Tips YouTube channel. Story 43. More stupid employee. A good friend, Steve, worked as a locksmith for a medium security prison. A really unpleasant job, apparently. He bid on and got the job as groundskeeper. He was the only actual prison employee, and his 4-man staff were trusty prisoners. The job was overseeing grounds using tractors, hand mowers, and lawn equipment. Some minor repairs were allowed, and the shop had tools for repairs. The groundskeeping hut was not on the actual prison grounds, but had its own unmonitored employee driveway and employee entrance. There was separate locked fenced driveway that went directly into the prison. This was how the prisoners and equipment came and went. The trustees were only searched when they returned to the prison grounds, either on the mowers or when returning to their cells. Otherwise, the groundskeeping hut was not frequently inspected. It was a plum prisoner job. My friend bought an older Harley which ran but not well. One trustee was a Maid motorcycle gang member, and my friend and he bonded over motorcycles. One day, Steve brought his motorcycle to work and showed it to the trustee. The trustee listened to the motor and said the bike needed bearings, which means an overhaul, a $4,000 job. If Steve could bring the crew in an hour or two before they were supposed to return to their cells, the trustee felt he could use that extra hour to overhaul the bike in a few weeks. And in the first days, he totally disassembled the Harley's motor. Later that day, while returning to the prison, the trustee got caught smuggling in a small screwdriver, which meant this trustee crew would never return. Steve knew the groundskeeping hut would be inspected the next morning, and he got the motorcycle frame and wheels onto a pickup and taken out the shop. He didn't have time to get the motor parts, which he could claim were leftover lawnmower parts, but he knew that unmistakable motorcycle frame with wheels was his termination. The next day, the inspectors glanced at the parts made him take all the extra parts to a secure dumpster. He was reprimanded for not inventorying tools daily and having loose mower parts. The Harley was toast, but he actually kept his job. Story 44. Here in Canada, there isn't really any rape in prisons as they look at it like, how can we beat up or kill offenders if we're ones ourselves? It was my first time in a federal pen, and I didn't know this. Golden rule. The first day I got there, I was assigned a cell, and when I went in, this older guy was in it, my future cellmate. He told me the guy who had the bunk before me wasn't really a clean guy, and I should get some disinfectant and a mop, and pointed me in the direction of the cleaning supplies room. I went in, and I was filling my mop bucket when I looked up and noticed these kind of shelves on the wall that said Government of Canada on them. In the shelves were condoms and lube and bleach. My eyes widened, and I went back to my cell and whispered loudly to my cellie, "What the fuck, they're encouraging rape?" I told him about the condoms, and he laughed. "Bro, there's gay guys in here who have consensual, and it's their way of stopping HIV. We just use the bleach to clean our tattoo needles and dye our hair if we get bored." Story 45. Taking off his shirt, showing a large illegal symbol on his chest, and then approaching a couple of black inmates and beginning to work out in front of them. It ended with him being violated in the shower by the people he thought he could trust. Story 46. Former CO here. I was in what's called the intake building. When people would come in for their first day, I would hold their papers in my hand, all official, like put my shoulders back and loudly announce, "Gentlemen, line up toes on the line. Welcome to Building 5. You will remain in your cell for 2 weeks. Your property will arrive within 1 week. If it doesn't, you may then let me know. At this prison, disputes are settled on the yard with a dance-off competition. If you have an issue with someone, let us know, and we will provide cardboard. Now everyone, on the count of 3, you will do 10 jumping jacks. And occasionally, a first-timer would do 1 jumping jack and everyone would laugh." Story 47. Saw this fat white kid who became Muslim and then moved into a 4-man cell with 3 black guys in Walla Walla. The next day, the COs were photographing the blood-soaked mattress out on the tier for all of us to see. Story 48. Don't talk. Book in, shut your mouth, be where you're supposed to be, and don't touch anything that isn't yours. Don't ever gossip. I can't stress that enough. There's no 100% way to stay safe, but the above is about the best you can do. Standard dumb is people either trying to be a tough guy or thinking they've got a friend. Both roads lead to the same end more often than not. Story 49. Not prison, but jail. I was getting put in irons with a tiny little next to me going to a court date. He looks at me and says loud as, "What did you do?" I looked at him and said, "We're going to our arraignments. Are you fucking stupid?" It's sad when the COs and DEPs laugh out loud. Story 50. Never been an inmate, but I did work as a jailer for a short period of time. I was always assigned to the felony pods, so I knew there were a certain number of guys in those pods that really didn't give a sight, but I didn't guys around or be in for no reason, so I was well liked by most of the inmates. One guy came in his first trip to the slammer because he got Xanad out and drove into a gas station, then proceeded to snag some cigarettes and other convenience items. I often considered the lifers to be the most laid back, especially the older ones, don't them? And they won't you, but mess with them and they mess back hard. So this day, I was sitting at one of the tables chatting with a couple of the older long-term residents, and this new guy comes in and sits at the table. The old-timers ask the new guy, "So what are you in for?" This fucking kid never even looks up and just says murder. I knew what he was in for. He knew what he was in for, and these other 2 well-experienced prison attendees knew well he wasn't there for murder. One of them almost snatched him from across the table. I intervened quickly and explained to the kid that this experience could be as shitty as he wanted to make it, or as simple. He could lay low and be in and out and back to his regular life, or He could enter this darker world by being a smartass when asked a simple question. I'm sure he was just scared being his first time in and wanted to maybe make a big bad impression. But telling two killers that you killed when you barely have hair on your nuts is a very bad first step. If I recall correctly, he stayed in 3 days waiting to bond out, and he didn't leave his cell other than to grab his tray and scarf down his food. He never even looked toward the shower. Story 51. Seen a guy flood the dayroom shower to take a bath, complete with a duck made out of TP. This was in county. Prison was what you would expect. But county jail is where the real show is. Story 52. A older inmate like 60 years old or so brought in a Santa sack-sized bag of food items acquired from canteen from cell block B into block C, which is the good behavior unit, hoping it would buy him immunity. News got around within minutes that he was in for battery on his ex-wife and then got rolled for the sack of goodies. Guards looked the other way and laughed. Story 53. Left the little kiosk thing logged in under his name, and others viewed his charges. Lewd behavior with a minor, I believe it was. Dude got his knocked out. Story 54. Not prison, but jail. It was always dumb stuff that we would prank them with. One example is having someone get a look at their name on their wristband and then going to the phone like they were answering it. They would then yell the new guy's name and look around. The new guy would finally say, "That's me." And then the guy on the phone would say, "Oh, here, it's for you." When the new guy walked over and said, "Hello," the whole pod would start laughing. You don't get phone calls in jail. Another was messing with new cellmates. One cellmate and I had been cellmates for a while, so when we got a third in our cell, we'd lay down a cell schedule for him with all ridiculous things such as, after lights out, we did 200 jumping jacks every Wednesday. We'd get to Wednesday and tell him to slide his portable bed under the bottom bunk and start doing jumping jacks and counting them off. They would 100% of the time join in, and we'd usually get to 20 or so before we couldn't contain our laughter and then explain that there was no cell schedule or jumping jacks. One time I had been in for about a year, of 15 a total 15 months, and had some clout at that point. I'm not a hard but can handle my own and had only been in 2 necessary self-defense fights in that time. With more time in jail comes certain privileges. You get a better seat by the TV. You get into the front of the line for meals, etc. A new guy came into the pod that day, and I heard the door click open for food to be served, even though most people were already lined up after the announcement to line up. I went to the front and got my food first, as did others with much more time than most. This is jail, not prison, so anything over a year is a fairly long stay in the county I was in. Apparently, this new guy didn't take too kindly to me, specifically, going to the front. He started staring at me for the rest of the day. A mean mug, if you will. I took a shower, and when I got out, an inmate came up to me and told me the new guy told him that he planned on just straight up sucker punching me. Here's the thing. Don't ever tell anyone that, especially if you're new and don't know anyone. I was well-liked throughout the pod and didn't have problems with anyone, for the most part. I was generous to those who were hungry. I was a fine card player. I had a sense of humor and wasn't a hard. I didn't tolerate disrespect from race to race, and I sure as didn't plan on getting sucker punched. So I, in front of the whole pod, said, "Hey man, I hear you've got it in your head that you're going to sucker punch me. Is this true?" He said it was true. I politely asked him into my cell for an actual fight, not some sucker punch. Don't go into someone's cell for a fight, BTW. Who knows what they have prepared to attack you with? I didn't have anything but my fists, though. I proceeded to beat the out of him, like he didn't get a single shot in on my face. His head and face was left bloodied and lumped. I will say that when the guards asked him what happened at dinner, he didn't say a word about me. I guess the dumb things he did was A, not respect privileges that come with time in, and B, thought a sucker punch was the answer and told someone about it.